welcome back. I've got Lisa Tromba online. Lisa, how are you?
I'm great this morning. How are you?
I am awesome. Been looking forward to this conversation for a bit. So why don't you share a little bit about you and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Okay, good. So I guess I'll just start by saying that I'm an executive recruiter, have been for many years. And so, had the great fortune to work with many leaders across industries, regions, markets. So, it's a lot of leaders, it's a lot of biases that I've seen over the years, which is sort of what led me to write the book. Because, it's a very important leadership lens that I don't think has gotten enough attention. I don't think organizations mostly don't understand it well enough to know that it's important to pay attention to. So that's how Mind Knots was born, really as a result of lots of work over the years and observations and problems that leaders would raise, executive hiring, leaders would raise about, things that were going off the rails. They share symptoms with me. And, over time, Michael, you collect all these stories and they end up, I could bucket them after a while. Like, okay, that call has come in from 10 different clients. The root cause of that looks the same. And so, you recognize patterns, and I was able to do that. And so there are 8 chapters in the book, and the headlines of those chapters really represent the most recent and common patterns that have come up, in terms of challenges that organizations have had with leaders.
And there's no shortage of the headlines you hear about different things. And a long time ago, I was in the IT department for Russell Reynolds out of Chicago. So I got to see, those executives coming in and hear conversations with some of the executive team and recruiting team on, some of the nuances and the
Mhm.
challenges of finding the right fit and making sure that the leader, didn't have any blind spots and the organization didn't have any blind spots on things. And of course, as you know, because you've been in the field for a bit, there's always something that's like, oh, we didn't see that coming, or this didn't pan out the way that it did, just because, well, you're dealing with human beings and egos and expectations. And, sometimes, even I'll put an employee hat on for a moment. We fall in love with the position even before we've started there, and we dream, and there's nothing wrong with that. You want to go into an organization full of vigor and excitement, because if you don't, then it's going to come through and you're not going to be there very long. But it's there's so many challenges that we face. And it's great that you've written this book to you kind of highlight what people are currently dealing with, because the last never that it's never been easy, but the last few years, my goodness, leadership has never been needed more. And especially in times where we've entered so many uncharted waters when it comes to remote work, the pandemic, supply chain issues, inflation, you name it, talent. All of these things have all come together about the same time, which is always fun when you're dealing with multiple crises at the same time. So the timing of this book is spot on.
Well, and thank you for mentioning that, because, that is really relevant. I mean, we live in a time now where things are just changing, not just changing rapidly, right? And so when you think about what a cognitive bias is, it's really a preconception. It's something that over time, we are wired with. We're locked into a certain way of thinking, and it often gets in the way of us being able to pivot, and we live in a time where if you cannot think outside of a lane, you're in trouble. So, that is one of the critical things to understand about biases, is they really keep us tied, to a very specific way of looking, perceiving, right? Processing information, how we take it in, what we do with it. So, in a day and age in which we live today, and in leadership particularly, it just doesn't work. It's like what I say is mental shortcuts is what bias, that is what they are. They help us process quickly and do quick things. Leadership's is complex to begin with, but the complexity has grown enormously, as you point out, in these, past years and in our current situation. So where there are, serious situations that deal with complexity, mental shortcuts don't work. And so therefore, biases don't work generally. Are there times when, they can be beneficial, of course, but not in leadership, not in the complexity of business, requires a lot more. And so it is quite serious. They demand our attention. And you brought up something earlier too, which I wanted to just comment on when you talked about your observation, being in kind of the search world and seeing what you saw. That is a reality because it happens on both sides of the table, right? So I talk about it from a leadership perspective, but hiring executives are leaders, and there's a whole set of biases that are operating, even in that process of assessing leaders and looking at potential leaders to bring into an organization. And then there are the whole other set of biases that we have as individuals, leaders have as individuals. And so when, you really have to consider what I do as an executive search consultant, I am, kind of tuned in to the biases that are happening on my client side in the hiring process and the biases that are potentially could be beneficial to the organization in a specific context, situation, mission, role, or not. To make reconciling that and bringing it together to get to the right decision or a good decision, that is really where the value happens. But you can't do that if you're not aware of the biases, right?
Of course, it reminds me of a story when I was working as a healthcare executive. I was running multiple site primary care clinics, and I was looking for a medical receptionist, and a resume came across my desk. And I looked at it, and it kind of reminded me of me in the aspect of this individual before they entered in the healthcare arena did not have healthcare experience as far as a
Mhm.
worker was concerned. Neither did I. I was hired as an executive, zero healthcare experience, and I was there at that clinic for a year before they told me why they hired me. It's usually a question the candidate. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing not too many times has a candidate ask you, so why did they hire me? No, they're just, if they, where do I sign? Let's get this going. They don't usually ask, wonder why they hired me. But I kind of had that in the background. I'm like, what did I say that convinced them to hire this individual that had zero healthcare experience? But back to the receptionist, she had zero healthcare experience, but I knew she would be amazing with very unhappy and grumpy patients because she worked in retail at a cell phone company.
Yeah.
And they get yelled at and screamed at all day long. And I thought, okay, she's going to be able to handle that. And the board was questioning my abilities, and a lot of the doctors are going, she has no healthcare experience. Why are you bringing in somebody? It's like she's going to pick it up. I'm not worried about that. It's not going to be a big learning curve. She'll pick it up, and she did, and she was so amazing. And the funny story too was, she had a pretty long commute to get to our clinic, and she used public transportation to get there. So it was a pretty long commute for her to do the role. And then I was having a conversation with a counterpart of mine that was running a similar clinic closer to where she lived. And he had asked, so anybody looking? I need an all-star medical receptionist. And I confirmed where their clinic was, and I said, I may have somebody in mind, but I need to talk with them first. And so I did. I went to her and I said, okay, see, you're not in trouble. I'm not letting you go. I'm not firing you. I'm not writing you up for anything. Don't worry, there's nothing going on. But there's an opportunity at this clinic, and I know that that's probably 10 minutes from where you live compared to the almost hour each way you're commuting right now. Would you like me to make an introduction? And she said, but I love it here. It's so great. You've been great. The team's great and all that. I said, I don't need an answer right away. Just sleep on it.
Yeah.
Think about it for a couple days. A couple days passed. She said, "You know what? it won't hurt. I'll have the conversation." Well, they loved her. They hired her. She left. the same doctors that were questioning my ability of, hiring this individual were then questioning my ability. Why in the world would you let this person
Correct.
leave? Why are you throwing them out? They're good. It's like you're confusing us. And it's like, no, I just knew that was going to be the right fit for her. And long story short, last time I checked, within a few years, she was running that clinic. So she
Wow.
went from working for a cell phone company to a receptionist to being an office management and then ultimately the administrator for that clinic site. And I think about that. And while, yes, I should be proud about that, but it's like I just created an opportunity. She's the one that ran with it. She's the one that did all the work. And that's all we can do in leadership, or one of the many things we can do as leaders is create that opportunity for
Mhm.
people to really run with it. And there's a lot of nuances in that. And we got to get past our biases, and it should be done this way.
Yeah.
But long story short, it's, when I like reflecting on that story from time to time because it's like I saw something in someone and I stepped back from my biases
Mhm.
and created an opportunity for somebody to, really thrive in their career.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's a great story. And it sort of I think I approach things, I think sometimes in terms of first principles, right? Meaning pull it apart, right? And when I'm looking at a candidate, yeah, we have our checklist and the client's wish list and all that good stuff, all important. But, what you really have to do is kind of like pull it apart and like fundamentally, what do we need for someone to be successful in this role and to perform in an optimal way? And it isn't always about checking, to your story, the healthcare box, right? And I have had similar situations where when you can cut through that, when you could step outside of your biases and help clients see, get out of their own way and help them see it in a different way as well, it can be, one of the most powerful and rewarding things that you can do by bringing, a leader into an organization that nobody maybe would have taken a look at, right? I don't know if you've ever read that book, Range by David Epstein. Fantastic book. It gets to the point of, we all become expert kind of in our lane, right? But when you can think beyond your lane, like step over into the next one or step over here, we gain so much insight and experience that helps us solve bigger problems in a much better way because you have a broader perspective. So in your case, right, you saw something beyond what the checklist might have been for that hire. And look what happened. It was really, there's a great story to tell. So yeah, whether it's, whether it's biases, it really is important to be thinking broader.
Most definitely. So in your book, you referenced 8 chapters. So, what I don't want to say, what's your favorite ones? It's like saying who's your favorite kid or your favorite pet kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, what chapters jump out at you time and time again that you think that you refer to the most? And I know you use all of them, but which ones do you run up against when it comes to leadership and all the challenges that they face time and time again?
Yeah. So, and you're right. I mean, there are 8 of them that I highlight in the book. I mean, there are over 200 of these biases, but the 8 were, quite prominent and common. Um, and I do have a few favorites because I think I identify with some of them, right? I mean, to be honest, we all have biases, they're just part of us. We're wired with them. So I'm clear about where mine are, and so certain chapters resonate more with me, and because I know it so well, I can see it so well, right? um I'm a pretty intuitive person, so one of my chapters is on intuition, and that can be an amazing thing in leadership, but it can also be a really risky thing as well. I go back to the complexity discussion that we just had, right? It isn't a straight shot, right? And yet, leaders who lead with intuition, it's it is really their power, right? So what do we do about that? We don't want to throw that away. We don't want to say like it's intuition's not valuable because it absolutely is. But to manage that bias, it requires understanding how it can go bad and what can you do to prevent that from happening. It's almost like we have to protect ourselves from ourselves or protect our organizations from ourselves and the way we lead. So, the opposite of that, the one of the big takeaways of the book is the premise is paradoxical thinking, meaning when you have biases are directional. Let me step back for a minute. They're directional. They either pull you toward a tendency or push you away from something. And it's important to understand that. So intuition, right, pushes you toward that big picture. It's optimism is tied to it. You see the vision. Your gut is telling you this is the way to go. So in the book, I talk about, okay, to manage that, you sort of have to think a little bit opposite. So the opposite of intuition would be logic, right? Being thinking through something, being analytical, looking at data, gathering perspectives from other people, rather than just going with what you believe to be the right way to move forward. So that's the counter bias in the book. So you have intuition, which is a very, very powerful bias that can take you in a very risky way down a road, and especially for an organization if you're a leader. And then you have the logic bias. So where someone, it's very hard to tell an intuitive leader, like, okay, you need to just stop for a moment. Let's put some processes in place to make sure. It's not about canceling out their intuition. It's really about supporting it in a good way, where you're bringing objective data in to and perspectives to be able to say, okay, is this really the right way to go? Or do we need to temper it a little bit here? So that is the big message of the book from an organizational level standpoint.
It's important to utilize all of those. And I love how you highlighted, we're not going to table the intuition side. We need that because you're going to use it when you're analyzing the information that you're gathering as well. It's like, yeah, okay, it looks pretty clear here, but if your gut, for lack of a better term, is telling you, but there's something here. What it
Mhm.
allows you to do, or hopefully creates the opportunity for you to do, is to dig a little deeper, ask a few more questions, and think about it. Like, well, what about this? Because with our biases that we bring to the table, it's like, making, a dinner or a recipe. We always use the same ingredients. Most of
Mhm.
us won't experiment too much. And, within reason, it's good to like, well, let's try this. Let's see what happens. And maybe we give this a shot. And that was, going back to that medical receptionist, I convinced him, I said, look, let's give her an opportunity. She interviewed well. If it doesn't work out, you know what? We can interview again, bring in some additional people. In the meantime, I'll bring in a temp agency, so there's not going to be a loss of coverage. There's really a pretty strong safety net here for us.
Mhm.
We're not going to be hurting from this, and I just think that we have somebody that potentially could be pretty special here and be the go-to. And that's what she was. She ended up being the go-to. People just went to her naturally. And when there was other people there that were more seasoned and been there for a while,
Mhm.
because they just, her personality matched up. There was so much about her that, really resonated well with the doctors, with the patients and everybody, because she just had that demeanor. And boy, they
Mhm.
were mad at me when they found out that I let her go. They were like, "What? Why?" I'm like the old saying goes, what if we, if we train them really well and they stay? It's like, well, what if we don't train them or they leave? And what if we don't train them and they stay?
Yeah.
And it's like I want to train people to be their best, whatever that definition of best is for them, and give them opportunities. Whether it was, and there was a few people, in that particular clinic, where gave them recommendations, and they, went on to, other healthcare roles and leadership roles. And I was beginning to get a reputation. You hire good people, and then you get rid of them. Like, I'm not getting rid of them. They're taking that skills and the gifts and education they got here and bettering themselves. You're the one that's still here. Maybe you want me to work with you? They laugh about that.
Yeah.
Some of them I really wish they would have left, but another story for another day. But
Mm,
I think at the end of the day, when it comes down to leadership, this conversation I had earlier, as well, is it's something that it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's a state of being. It's yes, it can be an action, and yes, it's activity and things like that. But leadership is this ever evolving adaptability, and utilizing whatever gifts you have and leveraging what you don't, and being fully aware that you don't have them, and reaching out to others and getting help on those things, uh,
mhm,
for the common goal of, okay, what's the best a possible outcome we can influence in this particular matter, and what
mhm,
resources do we have, and what resources do we
mhm.
need to find that outcome.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I mean, I guess what I would add is, the number one thing for me, when I think about leadership is that, leaders, the first thing they need to do is know themselves, right? Because you cannot begin to lead others unless you really do understand yourself, right? So understand yourself, understand others, and the influence piece is a big one, right? If you don't understand other people, you cannot influence them. You really need to know that. And, it goes back to kind of what I say in the book, right? You understand these biases, be aware of them, understand them, identify them, try to learn as much as you can recognize them in yourself. And most of the times people don't, we recognize them in other people far more than we ever see them in ourselves. So we do need to pay attention to comments we might get from someone else, recognize patterns in how we think, how we make decisions, actions we take. These are ways to identify them. And then most importantly, when you can get that down, it's about practicing and managing them, knowing what the techniques and strategies are to protect yourself from yourself, as I said before, and to manage them. And it really is all about that. And so when I think about leadership, and to your description, um, it starts with knowing yourself. And one of the lines that I repeat in the book is, know your knots, know the ones that can tie you down, because most of them will, and then know those that can give you speed and move you forward. It really is about how learning how to make them work for you instead of against you, because you can't eliminate them. I say in the book, leaders and their biases, it's a package deal. So you got to know, what's coming in with the leader into the organization. And most importantly, does that leader understand who they are and how they will manage that bias to work for them and for the organization?
Yeah, I agree. And I think where imposter syndrome comes into play in many cases is so many people, they they don't know who they are as a leader, and they're trying to be somebody that they probably aren't, instead of just being themselves. I tell people, especially new leaders, like, okay, they promoted you, right? And it wasn't, you grabbed the short straw, right? They went through a process, right? Yeah, it's okay. It's like, okay, so they believe in you. They want you to be you. They don't want you to be, unless they told you to. They want you to be you. There's a reason why you're the leaders, because they like you and what you bring. So don't try to be something you're not. But that's where mentors come into play. That's where studying different leadership styles, and having colleagues and trusted advisors to call you out on your ego and your biases, saying, are you sure that's a good idea? Whenever anybody asks me that question, I've learned begrudgingly, but I've learned that maybe my idea isn't good, so I got to dig a little deeper and figure out why, especially if it's not coming to light right away. But when they
Right.
say, "Do you think that's a good idea?" Like, ooh, that's a Danger Will Robinson kind of reference for those of us old enough to remember that show. It's like, okay, this is a something I should probably pause on and take a look at it.
Yeah, but
Sometimes,
see,
go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're highlighting something important. It's that ability to actually receive that comment from somebody and pause, right? Tell your brain, okay, I'm like, my brain's telling me, yeah, that's it. That's the way to go. But when you can really pause and receive that and think about it, right? It's powerful. It is powerful. And that is a strategy to managing biases, is to be able to do that. But you have to recognize, like, okay, maybe I'm not serving myself well right now and I should listen, right?
Agreed. And listening and thinking and taking the time to do that is critically important for all leaders. Doesn't matter what level in a company you are. You got to find that time to pause and reflect and think about things. It'll help you a long, long way. So, Lisa, I've loved
Yeah.
this conversation. Where can people find out more about you, your book, and all this amazing work you're doing?
Yeah, good. So yeah, the book is it's on Amazon. Mind Knots is what it's called. And I my business, again, executive search, can find me at I'm in the process of rebranding, but right now the website is Luisi, Luisi, Tromba.com. I can be reached there. And again, this has been great. Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate your interest and the good discussion.
Thank you so much. I'll definitely have that information in the show notes. So, Lisa, thank you again for being you. Really enjoyed our conversation and all the best in your future endeavors.
Same to you. Thank you so much. Bye bye now.